General Hospital spoilers reveal that Tracy sat motionless in her office at the Quartermaine estate, the dim light from the desk lamp casting shadows across her tense face. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a copy of a birth record extracted from a confidential source, a document she had obtained only by leveraging every old connection, hidden influence, and unspoken threat at her disposal. The dry, clinical words sliced through her mind like a blade. Mother, Brooklyn Quartermaine. Father, Dante Falconeri. The name Gio, someone she had regarded for years with a cold indifference, as an outsider. A child with no claim to the family, was now confirmed to be an undeniable part of the very bloodline she had spent her entire life guarding and controlling. The shock wasn't just emotional. It was the silent but devastating collapse of a core belief that Tracy had held as unshakable, that only she could determine who was a true member of the Quartermaine family. The revelation of Joe's true identity wasn't just a blow to Tracy's pride, it was a direct threat to her position of ultimate authority. She had always believed she knew every secret in the family, that no one could hide anything from her. But now, her own daughter, Brooklyn, and a man she never respected, Dante, had conspired to keep the existence of a Quartermaine heir secret for nearly 2 decades. What enraged Tracy the most wasn't Joe's existence, but the way the truth had been hidden from her, forcing her into the role of a bystander in the very family she had always controlled. To her, this wasn't just a personal insult, it felt like a conspiracy, intentional or not, to undermine her influence. Because now, with his identity confirmed, Gio had every right to inheritance, to involvement in family meetings, and even a potential stake in ELQ if this became public knowledge. And if that happened, she knew the position she had schemed for her entire life would be shaken in ways no one could contain. Tracy began to sense that everything around her was changing. Conversations fell silent the moment she entered the room. Brooklyn avoided her gaze, Ned hesitated at the mention of Joe's name. And Monica's silence was heavier than words. It was as if everyone knew, everyone except her. Her rage didn't erupt, it simmered beneath her skin like lava rising inside a volcano, waiting for the inevitable eruption. Tracy understood she couldn't let this shock consume her. Once again, she had to rise, but this time, not to seize control, but to regain the initiative in a game she'd been dragged into far too late. A new strategy had to be devised, not with brute force or authority like before, but with subtlety disguised as benevolence, with calculated moves hidden beneath a facade of compassion. Tracy had to approach Gio, not as an enemy or a distant grandchild, but as a potential ally. Someone she just happened to want to support. But to do that, she would have to swallow her pride, a task harder than any negotiation she'd ever faced. As she planned her next steps, the consequences of this truth rippled outward like circles in water. Once Joe's identity was confirmed and spread, the ELQ board would have to reconsider his rights. The Quartermaine family would fracture, not just because someone new had entered, but because those closest had colluded to hide the truth. Brooklyn would face immense pressure. Dante would be questioned for not defending his son's rights. And Tracy herself would be exposed, as someone left in the dark in the very family she once held in the palm of her hand, and carried a chilling calmness, as if he knew exactly how much power he held but was simply waiting for the right moment to use it. If Tracy didn't act fast and bring Gio under her influence, someone else would, maybe Sonny, maybe Jason, or worse, one of ELQ's rival shareholders. And if that happened, the only thing left for Tracy wouldn't be power, it would be the bitter sight of a new generation rising to power on the ashes of everything she had built with her life. The shock Tracy experienced wasn't an end, it was the start of a new war for control. And even if she wasn't ready, she was still the only one capable of changing the game. Because if she didn't, Gio would. And once he did, nothing would ever be the same again. Meanwhile, Rocco was entering a transformative stage, no longer the obedient boy sheltered by his family, but a young man forced to face the harshest truths. And the madness surrounding him wasn't coming from the outside world, it was coming from the very people he loved and trusted the most. Lately, Rocco had sensed something was wrong, something spreading silently through the household. The avoided glances from Tracy, Lois's strained smiles. The hushed conversations that stopped the moment he entered the room, all of it felt like a secret world unfolding behind his back, while he stood outside a door slowly closing on him. What sent chills down Rocco's spine wasn't suspicion, it was a suffocating certainty that something monumental was being kept from him. He began to piece together the fragments. Lois's overreactions whenever Gio was mentioned, Tracy's sudden shift from coldness to wary hesitation toward Gio, and most of all, the unease Gio himself seemed to carry in their interactions. Then, like a bolt of lightning through a dark sky, Rocco realized what no one dared to say. Gio was not an outsider. Gio was family. And Tracy and Lois, with their calculated silence, were hiding that truth. A new kind of chaos was taking root in the cracks of that hidden truth. Rocco felt like a character in a play with a script already written, blindfolded, forced to follow a path laid out by others. He no longer knew whom to trust. Tracy, the grandmother he once respected, who taught him honesty and family pride, was now guarding a massive secret with icy calculation. Lois, emotional and always championing what's right, now hesitated, dodged, and only spoke in half-truths when cornered. It felt like a collective betrayal wrapped in love. And Rocco felt suffocated in the very house that had once been his sanctuary. This new obsession wasn't just about feeling lied to. It was the brutal awakening to the fact that a system of power and secrecy operated within the family, where adults would sacrifice truth to protect image, honor, and political maneuvering. Rocco was no longer a child. He understood that if Gio was family, if he was Brooklyn's son, Lois's grandson, a Quartermaine by blood, then this cover-up wasn't just dishonest. It was a willful denial of someone's identity and rightful place. And from that realization, a new storm began to form. Rocco stopped being silent. He started asking questions. He confronted Lois. Looked Tracy in the eyes, and challenged Brooklyn. And with every half-answer, every evasive reply, Rocco grew more certain he was right. He was standing on the brink of not just Joe's identity crisis, but the family's. And if the truth wasn't acknowledged, Rocco would drag it into the light, no matter who it hurt. No matter who fell. Port Charles had never prepared for a storm like Rocco, once calm, loyal, and devoted to family. But now, he would no longer follow. As the madness escalated and the shadow of lies crept through every corner of the Quartermaine estate, it would be Rocco, fueled by anger and a hunger for truth, who would ignite the fire. And once that storm, set off by him, began tearing off every mask in the family, not even Tracy, Lois, or Brooklyn would be able to stop the consequences rising from beneath the surface. Tracy stood alone in the sealed meeting room of the Quartermaine estate. Her eyes no longer held their usual coldness, but instead reflected a deep, swirling mixture of calculation and panic. Tracy had always been the one in control, of family meetings, of ELQ's movements, even of the emotional currents that coursed through each member of the Quartermaine dynasty. But now, everything was slipping from her grasp. The legacy left behind by Edward and Lila, the foundation of power once fiercely protected by Alan, AJ, and generations past, was trembling. And the threat wasn't coming from an outsider, a rival business, or a longtime enemy. It was coming from within, from someone who bore the Quartermaine blood, Gio. The sudden confirmation of Gio as a legitimate member of the family had triggered a seismic shift, not only emotionally, but legally, financially, and in the power structure of the Quartermaines. As the child of both Brooklyn and Dante, Gio was no longer the lost boy Tracy had once dismissed, but a strategic figure capable of appending every plan she had painstakingly crafted. What terrified Tracy most wasn't just the appearance of a new heir, but that outside forces, hostile interests, opportunistic investors, opposing factions on the ELQ board, were beginning to exploit Joe's presence to attack the family from within. With a single misstep, a careless comment, Gio, as the rejected bloodline, could become a symbol, a weapon in the hands of those looking to topple Tracy and the legacy she guarded. Discontented voices were beginning to murmur about overthrowing the old guard. The press was circling. Sharp-eyed journalists were digging into rumors of a belated bloodline scandal. Shadowy financial rivals were reaching out to Gio, testing the waters, wondering if he resented a childhood hidden in secrecy. And if Gio chose to side with them. Every defense Tracy had spent decades building at ELQ would crumble. Faced with this threat, Tracy had no choice but to act, not with calm reason, but with cold, ruthless, and reckless moves. She began discreetly probing Joe's past for exploitable weaknesses. She ordered a re-examination of Brooke Lynn's financials, suspecting a hidden scheme to insert Gio into the power game. She secretly met with her private attorneys to explore legal ways to restrict inheritance rights in the event of a sudden claimant. More drastically, she began redrawing the entire family's asset distribution plan, no longer based on affection, but on loyalty and threat level. But the more Tracy acted, the more she found herself ensnared by the consequences of her own decisions. Each calculated step triggered unintended backlash. Brooke Lynn grew suspicious. Dante became guarded. Gio, though silent, began to avoid her, his eyes revealing a knowingness he had yet to voice. Outside observers began to spin the story, that the Quartermaines were cracking from the inside. That the old feared the young, and that Tracy, once the family's iron anchor, was now acting like a desperate tyrant willing to destroy her own kin to cling to an imagined throne. Tracy wasn't spiraling out of control, she was exerting too much control, driven by an overwhelming fear of losing power. She couldn't openly accept Gio without destroying her image as the omniscient matriarch. But rejecting him left a time bomb ticking under the family's foundation. Trapped between these two extremes, Tracy sank deeper into dangerous behavior, suppressing information, manipulating relationships, even considering manufactured scandals to divert attention. All for one purpose: to protect the Quartermaine legacy, even if it meant sacrificing one of their own. And when the storm finally reached its peak, when every so-called strategic move began to backfire, when trust within the family collapsed, Tracy would be forced to face the truth, that the greatest threat to the Quartermaines was never Gio. It was the unspoken fear inside her, the fear of no longer being the center, of being replaced by a new generation. And for someone like Tracy, there was nothing more terrifying than that. Rocco was undergoing a deep psychological crisis, a slow-burning collapse that was tearing apart the very core of how he viewed the world, his family, and himself. The discovery that Gio, someone he had seen as a peripheral figure, a family friend, a name with no weight, was actually his half-brother shattered the entire mental framework he had relied on for years. To Rocco, this wasn't just an unexpected truth. It was a betrayal. An insult. And above all, a direct threat to everything he believed in. No one had prepared him for this. There was no warning, no quiet conversation. No emotional buffer before the truth struck him like a brutal blow to the heart. And now, when Rocco looked at Brooke Lynn, the cousin he once respected, he no longer saw a family member. He saw someone who had willfully hidden the existence of his brother. When he looked at Lulu, the mother he had always seen as a source of kindness, he saw a cold void. A disappointment too vast to name. They had known. They had all known and kept it from him. And now, all Rocco had left was the crushing sense of betrayal, of being shut out of a story bigger than himself. Ironically, Joe's truth didn't just shake Rocco, it began to spread like an oil slick, pulling Lulu and Brooke Lynn into new conflict. The two women, already uneasy allies, now found themselves further entangled by a secret that refused to stay hidden. Lulu felt deeply wounded knowing Brooke Lynn had kept Joe's identity secret, not just from Rocco, but from her as well, the boy's own mother, who should have been given the chance to prepare her son emotionally. Brooke Lynn responded as she always did, defensively, closed off, and angry. She refused to accept blame. Especially from Lulu, someone she had always viewed as judgmental and meddlesome. This rising tension pulled Rocco into an even more dangerous spiral. Not only was he being asked to accept Gio as his brother, but he now had to watch the two most important women in his life turn their fragile relationship into an all-out war. Even more maddening was the realization that Joe's very existence had become the lightning rod for every suppressed emotion, every unresolved hurt in the family. Rocco no longer knew whom to believe, whom to trust. Every conversation carried hidden meanings. Every glance was laced with calculation. And in the midst of this chaos, Rocco felt small, isolated, and misplaced in the very story of his life. What should have been a healing moment, the acceptance of Gio into the family, had instead triggered a series of escalating confrontations, stretching every bond to the breaking point. Brooke Lynn, in her effort to protect Gio, grew more combative toward Lulu. Lulu, in her anger at being excluded, became increasingly protective of her son. And Rocco, caught between them, felt like a pawn being moved without anyone asking what he wanted. His suppressed emotions were building. And if no one recognized it in time, a true explosion could come, not from Gio, not from Lulu or Brooke Lynn, but from Rocco himself, the forgotten soul trapped between two scheming generations and a tangled past. This story had grown far beyond a simple bloodline reveal. It had become a full-blown crisis of identity, emotion, and power in a family already riddled with fault lines. With every passing day without healing, Rocco lost a little more faith in the people he once called family. And once that faith was gone, the consequences wouldn't just be tears or late apologies, they would be a permanent fracture in a generation that once had the chance to rewrite the future. If only they had known how to forgive, and tell the truth. Sunny and Olivia were no longer just bystanders. Once Joe's true identity was revealed, that he was the son of Dante and Brooke Lynn. A direct bloodline of two powerful families, the Corinthos and the Quartermaines, the previous equilibrium within the family was instantly shattered. This truth didn't just shake the family internally, it triggered an unprecedented reconfiguration of the hidden power dynamics. And in the eye of that storm, Sunny and Olivia quickly understood one thing: if they didn't act immediately to protect their grandson's interests, position, and future, someone else would, and when that happened, the outcome could be more brutal than any power struggle that had come before. Sunny, more than anyone, understood the dangers of a young person with powerful blood being cornered, excluded, or underestimated. He immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. Gio was not just a boy who needed protection. He was a young man carrying the legacy of two dynasties, a potential heir not only to wealth but to immense social influence. Sunny knew that without proper protection and guidance, that identity would become a weapon in the hands of those seeking to dismantle the Quartermaines from both inside and out. He knew full well, if Tracy was allowed to manipulate the narrative, if Brooke Lynn continued to hide the truth or falter, Gio would be reduced to a pawn, not a player. And Sunny would never let that happen. Olivia approached the situation differently. Her love for Dante had never faded, and when she discovered that Gio was her biological grandson, an instinct awoke within her, the fierce drive of a mother, a grandmother. A woman who had sacrificed much to protect those she loved from the ruthless political wars that constantly threatened her family. Olivia didn't care about power like Tracy. Nor did she scheme like the shareholders of ELQ. And precisely because of that, she was the most dangerous, because she fought with love, something that couldn't be threatened or bought. And when she joined forces with Sunny, a man who had never shied away from extreme measures to protect his loved ones, a new wave of control swept across Port Charles. It was unpredictable. Perhaps even chaotic, but devastatingly effective. No one was truly prepared for the alliance between Olivia and Sunny. One represented the heart, the other power. One was gentle but unyielding. The other sharp yet fiercely loyal. They didn't need to declare war, just show up at the right moment, make the right offer, and force those attempting to victimize Gio to retreat. Sunny began to establish a covert network around Gio, from academic advisors, hospital staff, to members of the ELQ board with past connections to Tracy. Meanwhile, Olivia quietly gathered sympathetic allies, Monica, Lois, even a few attorneys who had once stood with the Falconeri family. What began as a personal secret about Gio had now become the center of a new wave of social and political upheaval. And as Sunny and Olivia made their moves, everyone began to realize. This was no longer just about a hidden child. It was no longer a mistake to be buried. Gio was now the legitimate heir, with all the implications that title carried: power, responsibility, and most importantly, ambition. And once that ambition was awakened, not through rebellion, but through Sonny's mentorship and Olivia's unconditional love, Gio wouldn't stop at being acknowledged as a member of the family. He would claim his rightful place in both worlds. The Quartermaines and the Corinthos. That was the greatest shock that Tracy, Brooklyn, Ned, and the opposition in Port Charles hadn't seen coming. That Joe's existence wasn't a burden, it was a new era. An era sparked by a young man of dual heritage, backed by power, shielded by family, and driven by those who would never let him fail. And when that happened, there would be no turning back. Sonny and Olivia had made their move. And for them, this wasn't a game of chess, it was legacy.